I'm going to walk you through how to solve for some literal equations. And literal equations just basically mean you have letters. So the first thing I always want to do is I ask myself, what am I solving for? So I'm solving for h. So where is h? H is in the numerator. That's a good place for h to be. So that simply means that I just need to get rid of this 1/2 b. I need to get that out of there. So I ask myself, what operation is happening? So there's a multiplication happening here and a multiplication happening here. So basically I need to undo multiplication. So oftentimes students think, well, undo multiplication means divide. This is the problem now. If I were to divide like this, that's very ugly. I don't want to do that. Okay, so I want to avoid doing things that are more complicated. So undoing multiplication could simply mean multiplying by the reciprocal or the inverse. Okay, so that's what we're going to think about here. So let me rewrite this problem. So I have A is equal to 1/2 times B times H. So I want to solve for H. So I can do this in two parts, or I could do it in one swoop. But let's just do it for the time being. We'll do it in two parts. So the inverse of 1/2 is 2, or 2 over 1. You can think of it like that. So if I'm going to introduce multiplying by 2 on the right side, I'm going to multiply by 2 on the left side. So that gives me 2a is equal to, well, this divided out to 1. 1 times b is b times h. Okay, so that cleans it up nicely. And then I can go ahead and I can divide both sides by b. And so then that gives me my final answer of h is equal to 2a over b. The other way I could have done this is, I'm going to write it right here. Actually, let me use a different color pen. If I have a equals to 1/2 BH, if I recognize that as one unit, this is the same as A is equal to B over 2 times H. I could have simply multiplied this by 2 over B and multiplied this by 2 over B, and I would have gotten the same answer. So oftentimes there's more than one way to solve the problem. We try to use the easiest way possible. So that's your answer for that. Let's look at this next problem. So a lot of students, they get a little crazy when they have fractions. I believe this one, I didn't write it down, this one here is asking us to solve for x. So I'm looking for x. So if you remember in your order of operations, this is actually a grouping right here. So that's the last thing we're going to do, is deal with what's inside that group. And that group is x minus 2. So in this case, instead of thinking I'm going to get x by itself first, you want to get the group alone. Okay? And that group is this parentheses thing. You want to get that alone. So what's happening to the group? Well, it's being divided by 2. I'm going to rewrite this. So this is x minus 2 divided by 2 is equal to m plus n. So in order to get this group, we just think of it as orange. To get the orange alone, I have to multiply by 2 in the numerator. Notice that's in the numerator. You don't have to write this divided by 1, but I'm going to do that. Be careful right here. This is not correct the way I wrote it. To write it correctly, you need to have a parentheses around that m plus n because the 2 gets multiplied to everything there. So then this simplifies to whatever your orange is, which is x minus 2, because 2 divided by 2 is 1, and that equals to 2 times the quantity m plus n. So now I've gotten x, the group, by itself. So now I can simply solve for x. So I'm going to add 2. Be careful, this is all multiplying here and grouping, so I have to add 2 on the outside. So that gives me x is equal to 2 times the quantity m plus n plus 2. Simply leave it like that. You've just solved for x. This is the key right here. You got to think about getting the group alone. Okay, one more example. This is on page 31, problem 56. And initially you may go, oh my God, what the heck is that? You have to solve for x. So let's look where x is. We have an x on the left and we have an x on the right. Okay, so I want to get my x's together, but what's happening here? Well, my x's are also in a group, so I have to get the group alone. But you could be saying, well, that's kind of crazy, right? So sometimes we might divide by A or we might divide by C, but that's not going to work in this case because then I still have something being grouped. So in this case, I am going to distribute. So I'm going to distribute this A in to both sides on the left, and then on the right I'm going to distribute the C in. So remember, distributing is either multiplying or dividing to everything inside of that parentheses. So once I do that, so A times 3tx is 3atx. A times negative 2b is negative 2ab. I simply just put in alphabetical order. Then this equals c times dx is c dx, and c times negative 2 is negative 2c. Okay, so now my x is no longer in a group, is it? But it's in two separate locations. So let's get my x terms on the same side of the equal sign. So that means I'm going to subtract, use this pen, subtract this number. Remember, that's a number, like the number 20. It just looks funny. And then I'm going to subtract that on this side too. I intentionally did not put it underneath either one of these because it's not like terms at all. So now on the left side I have 3atx minus cdx minus 2ab equals, well, this became a 0. So then I'm just left with minus 2c. Okay? Remember, I want to have my x's on one side and everything else on the other. So that means I need to get this negative 2ab out of there. So I'm going to do the inverse operation, which is adding 2ab. I'm going to write this right over here. Not like terms, so I won't combine them. So now this gives me with 3atx minus cdx. That became a 0. And because this is positive, I'm going to put that first. It really doesn't matter, but I just like having my positive numbers first. 2ab minus 2c. Okay, so let's look here. There's an x term. There's an x term. So Look at here. I distributed this in, and I got this. In this case, I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to distribute the x out, which is the same as factoring out. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm going to factor out this x. That factoring out makes that x come in the front. So you can see this is going to start looking like this. I'm just doing it backwards. So x divided by x is 1. So I'm left with 3at minus, again, x divided by x is 1. So I'm left with minus cd. And that equals 2ab minus 2c. We are almost done. So the trick here is, remember, I want to get x by itself. So x is being multiplied by some number. This is it. I mean, that could be the number 1,550. It's just some number, which means I need to get that number out of there. So I'm just going to divide by 3at minus cd. Notice I have that whole parentheses there. So what I do to one side, I do to the other. 3at minus cd. This whole thing becomes 1. Okay, so that all divides out to 1. So that means then I'm left with simply x is equal to 2ab minus 2c, all divided by 3at minus cd. I don't have to have the parentheses because this division line is grouping my numerator and my denominator. However, if you were to do this, it's still correct. It's just a little excessive. So that is how I solve for x.